Unprecedented bushfires, unprecedented drought. No, this Australian summer has been the summer of unprecedented stupidity. Never before have we had to suffer such idiocy in public debate and political commentary nationally and internationally in relation to two of the most common and predictable occurrences in Australia's climate cycle, drought and bushfires. Let's start with the unprecedented stupidity of blaming Scott Morrison for the fires, as the lefties with their disgusting Twitter hashtags like #TheMorrisonFires have done. Australia accounts for only 1.3% of the global emissions supposedly responsible for the increase in intensity of these fires. By definition, our actions here in Australia, whether we like it or not, can only ever account for 1.3% of any increase in the intensity of the bushfires. In other words, if we had done everything Turnbull, the Greens, Greta, Rudd, Albo, Gillard, Ita, Matt Keane, Dave Sharma and all the other climate renewables crazies say we should have done, well, instead of losing 12 million hectares, we would have lost 11.844 million hectares. The climate cult would bankrupt our nation to save at most 1.3% of an increase in the bushfire damage. Unprecedented stupidity. Of course, there is a much cheaper and easier way to dramatically reduce the devastation and destruction of our bushfires. Piers Morgan, Prince Charles, David Attenborough and other non-Aussies, please take note. For 30 years, Liberal and Labor state governments have deliberately locked up our forests and handed over the management of them to environmental bureaucrats and green ideologues, with disastrous results. Don't say we weren't warned. As far back as 2005, the Sydney Morning Herald, when it was a paper worth reading, wrote that New South Wales Labor Premier Bob Carr's approach seems to have been to lock up as much land as possible, as cheaply as possible, and leave the problems this creates to the premiers of the future, regardless of the immense suffering this has imposed on so many country people. And then, to compound this unprecedented stupidity, state governments and local councils have continually caved into the half-wits and the brain-dead conservationists who insist on preventing what little hazard reduction and burning off had been planned from going ahead. In just that one instance, thanks to those Victorian protesters, the planned hazard reduction of 370 hectares, still minuscule by the way, was reduced to burning off just 9 hectares. And now, 6 months later, the place has been reduced to ashes. Great work, greenies. Not content with such stupidity, environmentalist idiots, anarchists, climate change alarmists, pontificating princes, failed prime ministers and certain left-wing moral degenerates have successfully brainwashed well-meaning children to blame Scott Morrison and climate change for the bushfires. For a fraction of the money required to decarbonise our economy, we could reduce the fuel loads in our national parks and bushland, provide greater fire access trails and ensure regular, efficient and widespread hazard burning. Indeed, Aboriginal Australians have long known that in order to manage the land and conserve nature, you have to know how to burn it.
You go back 100 years, pastoralists and people who are historically a part of land can tell you themselves. There used to be fires all the time, and even Indigenous people would work in with them and burn country regularly. But we've backed up to a point of regulations, land tenures.
So how often are you going around doing that kind of work?
Full time. I've been doing it for nearly 20 years.
Instead, we punish people who clear the land to protect themselves with massive fines and then blame climate change when their homes burn to the ground. Unprecedented stupidity. Any number of farmers and landowners have warned for years about the stupidity of not letting them clear the land and scrub adjacent to or on their own properties. As one firefighter said, fires run on fuel. Limited fuel means limited fire. One Bega farmer wrote to New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian only 18 months ago, warning that the surrounding fuel loads were a death trap. He was ignored by the Premier and ignored by her two hopeless Environment Ministers Don Harwin and Matt Keane. What a disgrace. No wonder people are angry.
Facebookers, I'm here at King Creek. And look at this. These greenies and the government and these wombats who don't want to burn off, you want your heads kicking in. Look at this. We're going to lose all our houses and properties because of you useless pieces of garbage.
Couldn't have put it better myself. We should be putting all our efforts into doing practical things that we know historically can and will make us safer. But instead, the loonies in the climate cult, the ABC, the Labor Party, the Greens, the Lovies, and disgustingly, the bedwetters in the Liberal Party demand we embark on some mad economic transformation that no other country has ever embarked on, that can at best only give us make a tiny 1.3% difference at some vague point many years into the future. And what's worse, this idiotic alarmism, this misrepresentation of facts, this unprecedented stupidity has gone all around the world.
And they say the planet is dying, and Australia is right on the front lines of this climate crisis. You have the unprecedented bushfires. You have, the Great Barrier Reef drying up because of the ozone levels in the atmosphere.
Happy Australia Day.